The howling wind outside Xavier Vaughn's cabin hit like cannon fire, and he knew without looking that this November storm of 1882 would be the worst Montana had seen in years. Xavier pushed himself up from his wooden chair near the fireplace, his weathered hands gripping the armrests as he listened to the fury building outside his remote home 20 miles north of Walla Walla. His mistake. Walla Walla was in Washington Territory, not Montana. He lived 20 miles north of the small settlement of Cedar Springs, Montana, where he bought his supplies twice a month and rarely spoke more than necessary to the shopkeeper. At 27 years old, Xavier had spent the last 5 years alone on this land, raising cattle and keeping to himself after losing his parents to a winter fever that swept through their previous homestead. The knock on his door came so faintly he almost missed it beneath the wind's roar. Xavier's brow furrowed as he crossed the small cabin in 3 long strides, his boots heavy against the wooden floor. Nobody traveled in weather like this. Nobody sane, anyway. When he pulled open the door, a woman collapsed into his arms. Xavier caught her instinctively, his strong frame keeping them both upright as snow whipped into the cabin. The woman was young, maybe 22 or 23, with long dark hair plastered to her pale face. Her dress was soaked through, and she was shaking so violently he could feel it through his shirt. "Help me," she gasped, her voice barely audible. "Please, the baby." Xavier's eyes dropped to her swollen belly and his heart lurched. She was heavily pregnant, and from the way she was holding her stomach with both hands, something was very wrong. "Get inside," he said, kicking the door shut behind them as he half carried her toward his bed in the corner. The cabin was simple, just one room with a bed, a table, 2 chairs, a fireplace, and a small kitchen area, but it was warm and dry. He laid her down as gently as he could, grabbing every blanket he owned from the chest at the foot of the bed. "What is your name?" Xavier asked, wrapping the blankets around her trembling form. "Penelope," she whispered through chattering teeth. "Penelope Evans. I was traveling with a wagon train heading west to my sister in Oregon. We got separated in the storm. The wagon overturned and I started walking. I saw your light through the trees." Xavier nodded, moving to stoke the fire higher. "How far along are you?" "9 months, Penelope said, her face contorting with pain. "The baby is coming. It started this morning. I thought I had more time, but the contractions are getting closer." Xavier had delivered plenty of calves in his years as a rancher, but a human baby was entirely different. Still, as he looked at this frightened young woman in his bed, he knew there was no choice. The storm showed no signs of stopping, and Cedar Springs was too far to reach even in good weather. They were on their own. "All right," he said, forcing his voice to remain calm despite the panic rising in his chest. "We will get through this. Tell me what you need." Over the next hour, Xavier boiled water, gathered clean linens from his meager supplies, and tried to remember everything his mother had told him about childbirth years ago. Penelope's contractions intensified, her cries of pain cutting through the storm's howl. Xavier stayed by her side, letting her grip his hand until his fingers went numb, offering what comfort he could. "I am scared," Penelope admitted during a brief respite between contractions, tears streaming down her face. "My husband died 3 months ago. Cholera. I have nobody except my sister, and I do not even know if I will ever reach her now." Xavier squeezed her hand gently. "You will reach her, you and your baby both. I promise you that." "You do not even know me," Penelope said, searching his face with wide, frightened eyes. "Does not matter," Xavier replied simply. "You are here, and I will help you. That is all that matters right now." As the night wore on, Xavier coached Penelope through each contraction, offering water and encouragement when she was sure she could not continue. The intimacy of the situation felt strange and profound. He was seeing this woman at her most vulnerable, and something in his chest tightened with an unfamiliar protectiveness. "What about you?" Penelope gasped between pains. "Why are you out here alone?" Xavier wiped her forehead with a cool cloth. "Lost my folks 5 years back. Figured I would make a life for myself out here where things are quiet." "Are you not lonely?" The question caught him off guard. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but lonely felt safer than losing people again." Penelope's eyes softened even through her pain. "That is no way to live." "Maybe not," Xavier said, "but it is the way I chose." Another contraction hit, stronger than before, and Penelope cried out. Xavier could see the baby crowning, and his heart hammered in his chest. This was really happening. "You need to push," he told her. "When the next contraction comes, push as hard as you can." Penelope nodded, exhausted but determined. When the contraction came, she bore down with all her strength, and Xavier supported the baby's head as it emerged. One more push, and suddenly he was holding a tiny, squalling infant in his hands. "It is a boy," Xavier said, his voice thick with emotion he had not expected. He wrapped the baby in clean linen and placed him on Penelope's chest. "You have a son." Penelope sobbed as she held her baby for the first time, her exhaustion forgotten in the wonder of the moment. "Hello, my darling," she whispered, touching the infant's tiny fingers. "I am your mama." Xavier stepped back to give them privacy, his hands shaking as he cleaned up. He had just delivered a baby. A human baby. The reality of it crashed over him like a wave. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside the cabin, there was only the sound of a newborn's cries and a mother's soft words of love. Xavier looked at them, this stranger and her child who had stumbled into his life just hours ago, and felt something shift deep in his chest. The next morning, the storm had lessened to a steady snow, but the drifts outside were too deep for travel. Penelope slept fitfully with her son tucked against her chest, and Xavier sat in his chair by the fire, watching them both. He should have felt imposed upon. His solitary life had just been upended by 2 people who needed his help and protection. But instead, Xavier felt something he had not experienced in 5 years, purpose. When Penelope woke, Xavier brought her water and the simple breakfast he had prepared. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Sore," she admitted with a tired smile, "but better than I expected." "Thank you for everything you did last night. I would not have survived without you." "You are stronger than you think," Xavier said. "You walked miles in a blizzard while in labor. That takes courage most people do not have." Penelope looked down at her sleeping baby. "I had to, for him. I need to call him something, not just baby." "Have you thought of a name?" "Thomas," she said softly, "after my husband. Thomas Evans was a good man. He deserves to be remembered." Xavier nodded respectfully. "Thomas is a fine name." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling fire and the baby's soft breathing. Finally, Penelope spoke again. "I do not know what I am going to do. My wagon is gone. All my belongings, what little money I had, everything. I have nothing but the clothes on my back and a newborn baby." "You cannot travel anywhere for at least a week," Xavier said firmly. "You need rest and recovery. After that, we will figure something out." "We?" Penelope asked, her eyes meeting his. Xavier felt his face warm. "I mean, I will help you figure something out." A small smile tugged at Penelope's lips, the first real smile he had seen from her. "You are very kind, Xavier Vaughn, kinder than you probably want to admit." Over the next several days, an unexpected rhythm developed in the cabin. Xavier cared for his animals morning and evening, fighting through the snow to reach the barn where his 2 horses, cow, and handful of chickens weathered the storm. The rest of the time, he stayed inside with Penelope and baby Thomas, helping however he could. He was surprised by how natural it felt to have them there. Penelope proved to be easy company, with a quick wit and a gentle manner that put him at ease. She told him stories of her childhood in Illinois, how she had met Thomas at a church social, and their dreams of starting fresh in Oregon where her older sister and brother-in-law had established a farm. Margaret wrote such beautiful letters about the land there, Penelope said one evening as she nursed Thomas by the fireplace. She said there was room for us, that Thomas could work with her husband. We sold everything to make the journey west. You can still make it to Oregon, Xavier said. When you are strong enough, I will take you to Cedar Springs. We can arrange passage on another wagon train in the spring. Penelope was quiet for a long moment. And until spring, that is 4 or 5 months away. Xavier had not thought that far ahead, but now that she mentioned it, the reality settled over him. You could stay here, he heard himself say, both of you, until you are ready to travel. I cannot impose on you like that, Penelope protested, though her eyes held hope. You would not be imposing. I have the room, and honestly. Xavier trailed off, struggling to find the right words. It has been nice, having people here. I forgot what that was like. Penelope's expression softened. Are you sure? I am sure. So it was settled. As November turned to December, Penelope and Thomas became fixtures in Xavier's cabin. She recovered her strength quickly, much to Xavier's relief, and soon insisted on helping with cooking and mending his worn clothes. Xavier protested at first, but Penelope was stubborn. You saved our lives, she said firmly. The least I can do is make sure you have edible meals and shirts without holes. Xavier had to admit her cooking was significantly better than his own, and having warm bread and proper stew instead of his usual bland fare was a welcome change. More than the food, though, he enjoyed the conversation. For 5 years, Xavier had spoken only to himself and his animals. Now his cabin was filled with Penelope's voice, her laughter, and increasingly, Thomas's alert coos and gurgles. One evening in mid-December, Xavier sat by the fire whittling a small wooden rattle for Thomas while Penelope darned his socks. The domestic scene struck him suddenly. How comfortable this had all become. Can I ask you something? Penelope said, not looking up from her work. Sure. Why did you really choose to live out here alone? You said you lost your parents, but there is more to it than that, is there not? Xavier was quiet for a moment, his knife stilling against the wood. My younger sister died too, he finally said. Emily. She was only 15. The fever took her first, then Ma, then Pa. I was the only one who survived. After that, I could not stay in the house where they all died, could not walk past Emily's room or sit at the table where we used to eat together. So I sold everything and came out here to start over. I am so sorry, Penelope said softly. That must have been unbearable. It was. For a long time I thought maybe I should have died too. Then I stopped thinking much about anything except work. Easier that way. Penelope set down her darning and looked at him directly. And now? Xavier met her gaze. Now I am starting to remember that being alive means more than just surviving. The air between them shifted, charged with something unspoken. Penelope's cheeks flushed pink, and she looked away first, returning to her mending with slightly trembling hands. Xavier felt his own heart beating faster. Over the past weeks, he had begun to notice things about Penelope that had nothing to do with her being a guest in need of help. The way her eyes crinkled when she smiled at Thomas. The sound of her humming while she worked. The grace in her movements as she moved around the cabin. The strength in her spirit despite everything she had lost. He was falling for her. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Xavier Vaughn, who had sworn off attachment and kept everyone at arm's length for 5 years, was falling in love with the pregnant stranger the storm had brought to his door. Except she was not pregnant anymore, and she was not exactly a stranger either. She was Penelope, and she was beautiful and brave and sitting right there in his cabin like she belonged. But she was also a widow still mourning her husband, and she had plans to go to Oregon. Xavier had no right to complicate her life with his feelings. Christmas arrived quietly. Xavier cut a small pine tree and set it up in the corner, remembering how his mother used to insist on decorating for the holiday. Penelope's face lit up when she saw it. "I thought Thomas should have a Christmas," Xavier said, feeling self-conscious. "Even if he is too young to remember." "It is perfect," Penelope said, and there were tears in her eyes. "I thought this Christmas would be unbearable, my first without Thomas, but you have made it bearable. More than bearable, you have made it good." They strung popcorn for garland and hung a few simple ornaments Xavier carved from wood. On Christmas morning, Xavier presented Penelope with a new shawl he had traded for at Cedar Springs during a brief supply run when the weather cleared. She gave him a set of warm mittens she had knitted in secret during the evenings. "I do not know how you found time to make these," Xavier said, genuinely touched. "Thomas is a good sleeper," Penelope replied with a smile, "and I wanted to give you something. You have given us so much." That evening, as they sat by the fire with full bellies from the special meal Penelope had prepared, Thomas began to fuss. Penelope picked him up, rocking him gently, but he continued to cry. "May I?" Xavier asked, holding out his arms. Penelope looked surprised but handed Thomas over. Xavier held the baby against his chest, swaying slowly and humming a tune his mother used to sing. To his amazement, Thomas quieted almost immediately, his tiny hand gripping Xavier's finger. "He likes you," Penelope said softly. "I like him too," Xavier admitted. "I've gotten pretty attached to this little fellow." "And what about his mother?" The question came out barely above a whisper, but Xavier heard it clearly. He looked up from Thomas's face to meet Penelope's gaze. Her eyes were full of something he was afraid to name, something that mirrored the feeling growing in his own chest. "I've gotten pretty attached to her too," Xavier said honestly. Penelope stood and moved closer, looking down at her son in Xavier's arms. "I need to tell you something. I have been thinking about Oregon, about going to Margaret's. It was the plan, and I thought I had to stick to it. But Xavier, these past weeks with you, I have felt more at home than I have in a long time. Thomas has never known his father, but he knows you. He lights up when you hold him. And I." "You what?" Xavier prompted gently, his heart hammering. "I have feelings for you," Penelope said in a rush. "I know it is too soon. I know I should still be in mourning. I loved my husband, I truly did, but he is gone. And you are here, and you are good and kind, and I think I am falling in love with you. I am sorry if that is inappropriate or if it makes things awkward, but I needed you to know before I make any decisions about leaving." Xavier shifted Thomas to one arm and reached for Penelope's hand with the other. "It is not too soon, and it is not inappropriate. Life is short and unpredictable. That storm could have killed you both. Your husband could have lived a long life but did not. My family could have survived that fever but did not. We do not get to control the timing of things, Penelope. We only get to decide what we do with the time we have." "And what do you want to do?" Penelope asked, her fingers tightening around his. "I want you to stay. Not just until spring, but always. I want to build you a bigger house with a proper room for Thomas and space for more children if you want them. I want to wake up every morning and see your face. I want to teach Thomas to ride and rope and be a good man. I want to love you both for the rest of my life if you will let me." Tears spilled down Penelope's cheeks. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes to all of it." Xavier carefully passed Thomas back to his mother and stood, cupping her face in his hands. "I love you, Penelope Evans." "I love you too, Xavier Vaughn." Their first kiss was gentle and tentative, both of them aware of the sleeping baby between them and the newness of what they were beginning. But it was also full of promise, a seal on the unexpected future they were choosing together. That night, after Thomas was asleep in the cradle Xavier had built, Xavier and Penelope talked late into the night about their plans. Penelope wrote a long letter to her sister explaining her decision to stay in Montana with Xavier, promising to visit when Thomas was older and travel was easier. "Do you think Margaret will understand?" Penelope asked, worry creasing her brow. "If she loves you, she will want you to be happy," Xavier said. "And you are happy, are you not?" "Happier than I thought possible," Penelope admitted. "Is it wrong to feel this happy when I lost so much?" "No," Xavier said firmly. "Your husband would want you and Thomas to have a good life. Honoring his memory does not mean refusing to live." Penelope leaned her head against Xavier's shoulder. "How did you get so wise?" "5 years of talking to cows gave me a lot of perspective," Xavier replied, and Penelope laughed, the sound filling the cabin with warmth. The winter months passed in a blur of routine and growing love. Xavier began planning the new house he had promised, sketching designs by firelight and discussing each detail with Penelope. She wanted a big kitchen with windows facing east to catch the morning sun. He wanted a covered porch where they could sit on summer evenings. They both agreed Thomas needed a room of his own, and maybe a spare room for the siblings they hoped would come eventually. In late February, when the snow began to melt and the first hints of spring appeared, Xavier made the journey into Cedar Springs to speak with the circuit preacher who passed through once a month. He returned with news that the preacher would come to the cabin in 2 weeks to perform a wedding ceremony. 2 weeks, Penelope repeated, her eyes shining. "That is so soon." "Too soon?" Xavier asked, suddenly uncertain. "No," Penelope said quickly, rising on her toes to kiss him. "Not soon enough, actually. I have been ready since Christmas, maybe even before." They were married on a sunny March morning with Thomas in attendance as their only witness besides the preacher. Penelope wore a new dress Xavier had ordered from the general store, simple but beautiful in pale blue fabric that matched her eyes. Xavier wore his best shirt and pants, his hair neatly trimmed and his face freshly shaved. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Xavier kissed his bride with Thomas babbling happily between them and felt a completeness he had never imagined possible. "Hello, Mrs. Vaughn," Xavier said afterward, grinning. "Hello, Mr. Vaughn," Penelope replied, matching his smile. "Ready to start our life together?" "I think we already started it," Xavier said. "That night in the storm, everything since then has just been making it official." After the preacher left, the new family celebrated quietly. Xavier had arranged for a neighbor couple, the Hendersons, whom he barely knew but who had seemed friendly on his supply runs, to come out for the afternoon. Mrs. Henderson brought a cake, and Mr. Henderson shook Xavier's hand heartily. "Good to see you settling down, Vaughn," Mr. Henderson said. "Man was not meant to live alone." "I am beginning to understand that," Xavier replied, watching Penelope chat with Mrs. Henderson while holding Thomas. When their guests departed, Xavier and Penelope found themselves alone as a married couple for the first time. Thomas had fallen asleep in his cradle, worn out from the day's excitement. Xavier pulled Penelope into his arms, suddenly nervous despite everything they had already been through together. "Are you happy?" he asked. "Happier than I ever dreamed I could be," Penelope said. "You saved my life that night, Xavier, but you did more than that. You gave me a reason to live again, a future I did not think I would have. You gave Thomas a father and me a home. How could I be anything but happy? I feel like I should be the one thanking you, Xavier said. I was just existing before you came, not living, just going through the motions. You reminded me what it means to care about something beyond the next day's chores. You gave my life meaning again. They stood together in the firelight, holding each other, Thomas's soft breathing the only sound besides the crackling fire. That night, they consummated their marriage with tenderness and passion. Two people who had found each other against all odds and chosen to build something beautiful from the ruins of their separate griefs. Spring arrived in full force, bringing green grass and wildflowers to the Montana landscape. Xavier began construction on the new house with help from Mr. Henderson, and two other neighbors who appeared once word spread that Xavier Vaughn had gotten married. The small community welcomed Penelope warmly, and she quickly made friends with the other women at the monthly gatherings in Cedar Springs. Thomas grew rapidly, his personality emerging more each day. He was a cheerful baby who rarely fussed, content to watch his father work or be held by his mother. Xavier marveled at how much he loved this child who was not his by blood but was absolutely his in every way that mattered. By summer, the new house was finished. It was not large by some standards, but to Xavier and Penelope, it was a palace. 2 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, a parlor with a real stone fireplace, and the covered porch they had both wanted. They moved in on a warm July day, Penelope crying happy tears as Xavier carried her over the threshold with Thomas in her arms. "Welcome home, Mrs. Vaughn," Xavier said. "Welcome home to you too, Mr. Vaughn," Penelope replied. "To all of us." That first night in their new house, after Thomas was asleep in his own room for the first time, Xavier and Penelope sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains. "I have something to tell you," Penelope said, a smile playing at her lips. Xavier looked at her, noting the glow in her cheeks and the sparkle in her eyes. "What is it?" "I am pregnant. We are going to have a baby." Joy exploded in Xavier's chest. "Truly, we are going to have a baby, truly," Penelope confirmed. "Are you happy?" Xavier pulled her into his arms, kissing her thoroughly. "Happy does not begin to cover it." "When?" "Late winter, I think. February or early March." Xavier did the math quickly. "That means you got pregnant right after we married." "Apparently we did not waste any time," Penelope said with a laugh. Over the next months, Xavier watched Penelope's belly grow with a mixture of awe and protectiveness. This time, there would be a doctor present if possible, and he would make sure Penelope had everything she needed. He traveled to Cedar Springs more frequently, buying supplies and making arrangements with the doctor who had recently set up practice in town. Thomas celebrated his first birthday in November, walking unsteadily and babbling constantly. Xavier had carved him a set of wooden animals that quickly became the boy's favorite toys. Watching Thomas play, Xavier marveled at how much had changed in exactly 1 year. Last November, he had been alone in his cabin during the storm. This November, he had a wife he adored, a son who called him Papa, and another child on the way. Penelope's pregnancy progressed smoothly, though she tired more easily toward the end. Xavier insisted she rest while he took over more of the household chores, much to her amusement. "I am pregnant, not broken," she protested. "Humor me," Xavier said. "I just want you and the baby healthy." "We are healthy," Penelope assured him, "but I appreciate your concern. You are going to be a wonderful father." "I already am a father," Xavier pointed out. "Thomas made me one." "You are," Penelope agreed warmly. "And this baby is lucky to have you, just like Thomas is." The baby came in late February, right on schedule. This time the doctor made it through from Cedar Springs and the birth went smoothly. Xavier paced the parlor while the doctor attended to Penelope, his nerves jangling despite the professional help. When the doctor finally emerged with a smile, Xavier nearly collapsed with relief. "You have a healthy daughter, Mr. Vaughn," the doctor announced, "and your wife did beautifully. You can go in now." Xavier entered the bedroom to find Penelope propped up against the pillows, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. She looked exhausted but radiant. "Come meet your daughter," she said softly. Xavier approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at the tiny face peeking from the blanket. She had a cap of dark hair and delicate features that reminded him of Penelope. His daughter. His and Penelope's. "She is perfect," Xavier whispered, reaching out to touch one impossibly small hand. The baby's fingers wrapped around his thumb and his heart melted completely. "What should we name her?" "I was thinking Rose," Penelope said. "After your mother. You told me her name was Rose, and I thought maybe we could honor her." Xavier felt emotion clog his throat. "You want to name our daughter after my mother, if you would like that. She was part of making you the man you are, the man I love. I think she should be remembered." "Rose Vaughn," Xavier said, testing the name. "It is perfect. Thank you, Penelope. This means more than you know." Thomas was introduced to his baby sister later that afternoon. At 18 months old, he was curious about the tiny creature his mother held, reaching out to pat her head gently when prompted. "Baby," he said clearly, one of his few words. "That is right," Xavier said, lifting Thomas onto the bed carefully. "That is your sister, Rose. You are going to be her big brother." Thomas seemed to consider this, then leaned forward and kissed Rose's forehead clumsily. Everyone laughed, and Xavier felt his chest might burst from happiness. The years that followed were full and busy. Rose grew into a bright, cheerful toddler who followed Thomas everywhere. Thomas was a protective older brother, always watching out for his little sister. Xavier expanded his ranch, building up his herd and gaining a reputation for quality cattle. Penelope managed their household with grace and efficiency, becoming a respected member of the Cedar Springs community. When Rose was 2 and Thomas almost 4, Penelope became pregnant again. This pregnancy was harder and Xavier worried constantly, but Penelope remained optimistic. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time," she reminded him. "I will be fine." She was right. In the spring of 1886, she delivered another healthy baby, this time a boy they named James after Penelope's father. James had his father's strong build and his mother's easy temperament. Xavier now found himself the father of 3 children, a fact that sometimes made him stop and shake his head in wonder. One evening that summer, Xavier sat on the porch with Penelope while the children played in the yard. Thomas was teaching Rose how to throw a ball while baby James dozed in his mother's arms. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Do you ever think about that night?" Penelope asked. "The night I showed up at your door." "All the time," Xavier admitted. "Sometimes I wake up and think maybe it was all a dream, that I will open my eyes and be alone in that old cabin again. But then you realize it is real," Penelope said with a smile. "Then I realize it is real, and I am the luckiest man alive." Penelope leaned her head against his shoulder. "I think we are both lucky. That storm could have killed Thomas and me. Instead, it brought us to exactly where we needed to be." "Fate," Xavier said. "Or God," Penelope added. "Or just dumb luck. Whatever it was, I am grateful for it every day." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children, listening to the sounds of their ranch settling in for the night. Xavier thought about the man he had been 4 years ago, closed off and afraid to care about anything. That man would not recognize the life Xavier had now, and he would not want to go back to being him for anything in the world. The ranch prospered over the next several years. Xavier hired 2 ranch hands to help with the growing workload, young men who were reliable and hardworking. The Vaughn Ranch became known throughout the territory for quality livestock and fair dealing. Xavier's reputation grew, and with it, their financial security. Thomas started school in Cedar Springs when he turned 6, riding into town with Xavier 3 days a week. He proved to be a bright student who loved reading, something that pleased both his parents. Rose was more interested in the ranch itself, following Xavier around whenever he allowed it and learning everything she could about the animals and land. "She is going to be a rancher," Xavier said to Penelope one evening. "She is going to be whatever she wants to be," Penelope corrected with a smile. "But yes, she loves this land like you do." James, meanwhile, was a happy toddler who loved everyone and everything. He was fearless in a way that gave Xavier heart palpitations, climbing everything he could reach and investigating every corner of the ranch with determined curiosity. In 1888, when Thomas was 7, Rose 5, and James 3, Penelope announced she was pregnant once more. This pregnancy felt different, she said, but she could not quite explain how. The doctor confirmed she was carrying twins. Xavier nearly fainted when he heard the news. Twins. They were going to have 5 children. "We need to expand the house," he said immediately. "We need to breathe," Penelope replied, laughing at his panic. "We have time, Xavier. Twins are not monsters. They are just 2 babies instead of 1. 2 babies, Xavier repeated, trying to wrap his mind around it. But as always, Penelope was right. When the twins arrived that fall, a boy and a girl they named Samuel and Lily, they fit into the family as if they had always been there. The older children were fascinated by the babies, and the house rang with noise and laughter and the beautiful chaos of a large family. Xavier added 2 more rooms to the house, creating space for everyone. Money was not as tight as it once had been, and he spared no expense making sure his family was comfortable. Penelope managed their growing household with the same calm efficiency she brought to everything, somehow keeping track of 5 children and running the ranch household without seeming overwhelmed. "How do you do it?" Xavier asked her one particularly chaotic evening when all 5 children seemed to need something at once. "I remember being alone in that storm," Penelope said simply. "I remember thinking I might die, that Thomas might die before he even had a chance to live. And then I remember you opening that door. This chaos, this noise, this wonderful mess of a life is everything I did not think I would have, so I do not mind the work." Xavier pulled her into his arms, careful not to jostle baby Samuel, who she was holding. "I love you, Penelope Vaughn. More now than the day I married you, and I loved you plenty then." "I love you too," Penelope replied. "Thank you for saving us. Thank you for giving us this life." "Thank you for knocking on my door," Xavier said. "Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for staying." The twins thrived, growing into their own personalities. Samuel was quiet and observant, content to sit and watch the world around him. Lily was the opposite, vocal and demanding, making sure everyone knew exactly what she wanted at all times. Together, they were a perfect pair. As the years passed, the Vaughn family became fixtures in Cedar Springs. Penelope joined the church auxiliary and helped organize community events. Xavier served on the town council and helped settle disputes among ranchers. Their children attended school and grew strong and healthy, each one unique, but all of them loved deeply. Thomas showed an aptitude for business, often helping Xavier with the ranch accounts. Rose became an accomplished rider and could handle cattle as well as any ranch hand. James inherited his father's building skills and was always constructing something in the barn. Samuel developed a love for music, teaching himself to play the harmonica Xavier bought him. Lily decided she wanted to be a teacher, practicing on her younger siblings and anyone else who would sit still long enough. One evening in the spring of 1895, Xavier and Penelope sat on their porch as they had countless times before. The children were all inside, the older ones helping the younger ones prepare for bed. 13 years had passed since that stormy night that changed everything. "You ever wonder what would have happened if the storm had not come?" Penelope asked. Xavier considered the question. "You would have made it to Oregon probably, built a life with your sister. Thomas would have grown up there. And you would still be alone in your cabin," Penelope added. "Maybe, or maybe I would have eventually ventured into town and met some other woman. But it would not have been you, and this would not be our life." Xavier reached for her hand. "I do not like to think about that possibility." "Neither do I," Penelope admitted. "This is exactly where I am supposed to be, where we are both supposed to be." They heard laughter from inside, the sound of their children playing some game before bedtime. Thomas's voice rose above the others, telling the younger ones to settle down. Rose was singing something off-key. James was banging on something that sounded suspiciously like a pot. The twins were giggling uncontrollably at whatever mischief they were causing. "Our life is loud," Xavier observed. "It is wonderful," Penelope corrected. "It is both," Xavier agreed, pulling her close. "It is everything I never knew I wanted until that night you showed up on my doorstep." "Frozen and pregnant and desperate," Penelope said with a laugh. "Beautiful and brave and perfect," Xavier countered. "From the moment I caught you when you fell through my door, I think some part of me knew you were going to change my life." "And did I?" Penelope asked, though she knew the answer. "You gave me back my life," Xavier said seriously. "I was not living before you came, Penelope. I was existing, going through the motions, keeping everyone at a distance. You changed all of that, you and Thomas and all the children that came after. You made me remember what it means to be part of a family, to love people so much it terrifies you because you might lose them." "But you have not lost us," Penelope said gently. "No," Xavier agreed. "And I am grateful for that every single day. Every morning I wake up and see you next to me, hear our children making noise in the house. I think about how close I came to missing all of this. If the storm had not come, if you had not seen my light, if I had not opened that door." "But you did open the door," Penelope reminded him. "You did not turn me away even though you had every reason to. You helped me, saved Thomas and me, and then you loved us. That was your choice, Xavier, not fate or luck or circumstance. You chose to open your heart." Xavier kissed her softly. "Best choice I ever made." Inside, they heard Thomas calling for them. "Ma, Pa." Samuel stuck a bean up his nose. Penelope sighed and started to rise, but Xavier stopped her. "I will handle it, you rest." "My hero," Penelope said with a tired smile, "still saving me after all these years." "Always," Xavier promised, heading inside to deal with the bean crisis. The years continued to pass in a blur of seasons and milestones. Thomas turned 18 and began courting the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a sweet girl named Mary who fit into their family easily. Rose, at 16, was being courted by several young men, much to Xavier's consternation, though she seemed more interested in working with the horses than any of her suitors. James, at 14, was already as tall as Xavier and showed promise as a carpenter and builder. The twins at 10 were still inseparable, Samuel now playing several instruments and Lily excelling in her studies. One autumn evening in 1898, Xavier found himself alone with Thomas, checking on the cattle in the far pasture. At 19, Thomas was a man now, tall and capable, ready to start his own life. "I want to thank you," Thomas said suddenly as they rode, "for everything you have done for me and Ma." Xavier was surprised. "You do not need to thank me, son. You are my boy, always have been." "But I am not, though," Thomas said. "Not by blood. You took us in when you did not have to. You gave us a home, a family, a life. You have been the only father I have ever known, and you have been a good one." Xavier felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Being your father has been one of the greatest privileges of my life, Thomas. Blood does not make a family. Love does. And I have loved you since the night you were born in my cabin during that storm." "I am planning to ask Mary to marry me," Thomas said. "I wanted you to know first. To ask your blessing, I suppose." "You have it," Xavier said immediately. "Mary is a good woman and you will make a fine husband. Are you planning to stay in Montana?" "I was hoping to build a place nearby," Thomas said. "Close enough to help with the ranch, but far enough to give Mary and me our own space. That is, if you want the help." "I will always want your help," Xavier said, "and having you close by would make your mother and me very happy." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, then Thomas spoke again. "I remember bits and pieces of that night I was born. Obviously not the birth itself, but feelings. Being cold and then warm, hearing voices. I think I remember your voice telling Ma everything would be all right." "I had no idea if it would be all right," Xavier admitted. "I was terrified I would mess something up, but I had to stay calm for your mother." "She tells the story sometimes," Thomas said, "about the storm and finding your cabin and you delivering me. She says it was the worst and best night of her life. The worst because she was in pain and scared. The best because she got me and found you." Xavier smiled. "Your mother has always had a way with words." "She also says you are the love of her life," Thomas continued. "That my father was a good man and she mourns him, but you are her heart. I thought you should know that in case you ever doubt it." "I do not doubt it," Xavier said, "but it is good to hear anyway. Your mother is the love of my life too, her and you kids. Everything good in my life came from that storm." Thomas and Mary married the following spring in a beautiful ceremony at the church in Cedar Springs. The whole community turned out to celebrate, and Xavier felt a fierce pride watching his oldest son pledge his life to his new bride. Penelope cried through the entire ceremony, happy tears that she did not bother trying to hide. "Our baby is married," she said to Xavier afterward. "He is 19, Xavier pointed out. "Not exactly a baby anymore." "He will always be my baby," Penelope said firmly, "just like the rest of them. Just like you will always be my love." True to his word, Thomas built a house on land Xavier deeded to him, close enough to the main ranch to help with the work, but far enough to give the young couple privacy. By the following year, Thomas and Mary announced they were expecting their first child, making Xavier and Penelope grandparents. "Grandparents," Xavier said, shaking his head in disbelief. "I am not old enough to be a grandfather." "You are 44, Penelope reminded him with amusement. "That is plenty old enough, and I think you will be a wonderful grandfather." The baby arrived in early 1901, a healthy boy Thomas and Mary named Xavier after the grandfather who had saved his father's life. Holding his tiny grandson, Xavier felt the circle complete in a way he could not quite articulate. This child was Thomas's son, and Thomas was in every way that mattered Xavier's son, which made this baby part of Xavier's legacy, even though they shared no blood. "Hello, little Xavier," he said softly, touching the baby's tiny hand. "Welcome to the family." Penelope stood beside him, tears streaming down her face as she watched her husband hold their first grandchild. "It is perfect," she whispered. "Everything about this is perfect." As the new century progressed, the Vaughn family continued to grow and thrive. Rose eventually married a schoolteacher who appreciated her independent spirit and love of the land. They settled in Cedar Springs, where Rose helped her husband with his students, while maintaining her own small herd of horses. James married a girl from town and became a successful builder, constructing houses and barns throughout the territory. Samuel left Montana to study music in San Francisco, sending long letters home about his adventures and performances. Lily became a teacher as she had always wanted, running the school in Cedar Springs and becoming beloved by her students. The twins married within months of each other in 1908, both settling nearby with their spouses. The Vaughn family gatherings became large, boisterous affairs with children and grandchildren filling the house that Xavier had built for Penelope all those years ago. One evening in the summer of 1910, Xavier and Penelope sat on their porch watching the sunset. They were both in their early 50s now, their hair showing silver threads and their faces lined with the years. But Penelope was still beautiful to Xavier, and he still made her heart flutter with a smile. 28 years, Penelope said softly. That is how long it has been since the storm. 28 years since I became the luckiest man alive, Xavier replied, taking her hand. We have had a good life, Penelope said. Better than I ever imagined that night when I knocked on your door. We have had the best life, Xavier corrected. 5 children, 7 grandchildren so far, a successful ranch, respect in the community, and we still have each other. What more could anyone want? Nothing, Penelope said. This is everything. They sat together as the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant colors. From the house, they could hear the sounds of their family. Thomas and Mary had come for supper with their 3 children. Rose and her husband were visiting with their 2 girls. The house was full of laughter and conversation and life. I still think about him sometimes, Penelope said quietly. Thomas Evans, my first husband. I wonder what he would think of all this, of the life I built after he was gone. Xavier squeezed her hand gently. I think he would be happy that you and his son survived, that you found love again, that you built something good from your grief. I hope so, Penelope said. I loved him, but I love you too. Differently, maybe, but just as deeply. Is it wrong to be grateful for a storm that killed my husband even though it brought me to you? You are not grateful your husband died, Xavier said firmly. You are grateful you survived. There is a difference. You are allowed to mourn what you lost and celebrate what you found. When did you become so wise? Penelope asked with a smile. 28 years of being married to you taught me a lot, Xavier replied. They laughed together, the easy laughter of 2 people who knew each other completely, who had weathered storms both literal and figurative and come through stronger. The years had brought challenges, of course. There had been hard winters and dry summers that threatened the ranch. There had been childhood illnesses that terrified them both. There had been arguments and disagreements and moments of frustration. But through it all, the foundation of their love remained solid. I want you to know something, Xavier said, turning to face Penelope fully. If I had to go back and live my life again, I would not change a single thing. Every moment, every decision, every step led me to that cabin on that night when you needed help. It led me to you and Thomas and the family we built together. I would not trade any of it, not even the lonely years. Penelope asked. Not even those, Xavier confirmed. Because those years shaped me into the man who was ready to open his heart when you came along. If I had not known loss, I might not have recognized what I was gaining. I needed to be alone to appreciate what it meant to be part of a family again. Penelope leaned against him, her head on his shoulder as they watched night fall over their land. I love you, Xavier Vaughn. I have loved you for 28 years, and I will love you for however many years we have left. And I love you, Penelope Vaughn, Xavier replied. You are my heart, my home, my everything. Thank you for knocking on my door. Thank you for staying. Thank you for building this life with me. As the stars began to appear overhead and the sounds of their family drifted out from the house, Xavier thought about the journey that had brought him here. From the lonely man in a small cabin to the patriarch of a large, loving family. From someone who had closed his heart after loss to someone who had opened it wide enough to encompass a wife, 5 children, and a growing number of grandchildren. The storm had brought Penelope to his door pregnant and desperate, and he had delivered her baby not knowing he was delivering his own future along with that child. Every moment since then had been building to this, to a life rich with love and meaning and purpose. "What are you thinking about?" Penelope asked, noticing his contemplative expression. "Just that sometimes the best things in life come from the worst storms," Xavier said. "And that fate has a funny way of giving us exactly what we need exactly when we need it. Even if we did not know we needed it," Penelope added. "Especially then," Xavier agreed. They sat together long into the night, talking quietly and watching the stars, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had built from one stormy night and a choice to help a stranger in need. The choice that changed everything. The storm that brought not just a pregnant stranger to Xavier's door, but the love of his life, a ready-made family, and a future he had never dared to dream about during those lonely years. The years continued to unfold with the steady rhythm of seasons and family milestones. More grandchildren arrived, filling the Vaughn ranch with the sound of young voices. Xavier taught each one to ride, passing on his skills and his love for the land. Penelope spoiled them all equally, her kitchen always full of cookies and her arms always ready for hugs. As Xavier moved into his 60s, he gradually stepped back from the day-to-day ranch operations, passing more responsibility to Thomas and James, who had become partners in the business. Rose managed the horse breeding program that had become a profitable sideline. The ranch prospered under the next generation's stewardship, and Xavier took pride in watching his children succeed. Thomas's son, young Xavier, grew into a fine young man who reminded the elder Xavier of himself at that age. The boy had his namesake's work ethic and his father's head for business, along with a generous heart that came from growing up surrounded by love. "He is a good boy," Xavier said to Penelope one evening as they watched their grandson work with one of the horses. "He comes from good people," Penelope replied. "You and Thomas raised him right." "We all raised him," Xavier corrected. "It takes a family to raise children properly. We have given them all a foundation of love and security. The rest they figured out themselves." In 1918, Xavier turned 63 and Penelope 60. Their children threw them a joint birthday celebration that brought the entire family together. 23 people gathered at the ranch that day, 3 generations of Vaughns sitting down to dinner together. Looking around the table at all these faces, these lives that existed because of one stormy night 36 years ago, Xavier felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Thomas sat at one end with Mary and their 4 children. Rose and her husband had their 3 daughters with them. James and his wife brought their 2 sons. Samuel had come home from California with his wife, a singer he had met in San Francisco, and their baby daughter. Lily and her husband brought their twin boys, who were causing their usual cheerful chaos. Speech. Someone called out, and soon everyone was chanting for Xavier to say something. Xavier stood, his hand resting on Penelope's shoulder. "I am not much for speeches," he began, "but I do want to say something. 36 years ago, I was alone in a cabin during the worst storm Montana had seen in years. I heard a knock on my door, and when I opened it, I found a young woman who was about to give birth. I had no idea that helping her would change my entire life." He looked down at Penelope, whose eyes were already filling with tears. "That woman became my wife. Her baby became my son. And from that night, all of this grew. Every person at this table exists because of that storm, because Penelope found her way to my door, because we chose to build a life together. Xavier's voice grew thick with emotion. I want you all to know that you are my greatest achievement. Not the ranch, not the success we have had, but this family, the love we share, the way we support each other, the way we show up for each other no matter what. That is what matters. That is what will last long after Penelope and I are gone. Do not talk about being gone, Rose protested. You two are going to live forever. Nobody lives forever, Xavier said gently. But love does. The love your mother and I share, the love we have for all of you, the love you have for each other and for your own families, that love will last. It will be passed down through generations. And someday, when your children and grandchildren ask about their great-grandparents, you can tell them about the storm that brought us together and the life we built. There was not a dry eye at the table when Xavier sat back down. Penelope kissed his cheek and whispered, "That was perfect." "You are perfect." "We are perfect together," Xavier corrected, squeezing her hand. The celebration continued late into the evening with music and laughter and stories shared. Young Xavier played the fiddle while Samuel accompanied him on piano. The children ran around the yard chasing fireflies. The adults talked and reminisced, telling old stories and making new memories. As the party wound down and families began heading home, Thomas pulled Xavier aside. "Thank you, Pa, for everything you said tonight, but more for everything you have done. You made me feel like I was truly yours from the day I was born. You never treated me differently than the other kids. You gave me a father when I had none. You were always mine," Xavier said firmly, pulling Thomas into a hug. "Blood does not make a family, son. Love does. And I loved you from the moment I helped you take your first breath." "I know," Thomas said, "and I hope I have been half the father to my children that you have been to me." "You have been an excellent father," Xavier assured him. "Your kids are good people, and that is because of you and Mary." After everyone left, Xavier and Penelope stood together on the porch in the moonlight, tired but happy. The house was quiet again, back to just the two of them as it had been more and more often in recent years. "That was a good party," Penelope said, leaning against Xavier. "It was perfect," Xavier agreed, "though I am getting too old for this much excitement." "We are not old," Penelope protested. "We are experienced." Xavier laughed, the sound rumbling in his chest. "Is that what we are calling it now?" They stood together in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, cattle lowing in the distance, the horses moving in the barn, an owl hooting from the trees. These were the sounds of home, of the life they had built together. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had not found your cabin?" Penelope asked. "All the time," Xavier admitted. "And it terrifies me. Thomas might have died. You might have died. At the very least, I never would have known you, never would have had this life." "That thought is unbearable. But I did find you," Penelope said. "And we did build this life. And it has been better than anything I could have imagined when I was walking through that storm, scared and alone and in pain." "You were never alone," Xavier said. "Not from the moment I opened that door. From that moment on, you had me. You will always have me." "And you have me," Penelope replied, "until the end of our days and beyond." The years moved forward with increasing speed, as they tend to do when life is full and happy. Xavier and Penelope celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary in 1923, surrounded once again by their growing family. There were now great-grandchildren toddling around, adding another generation to the Vaughn legacy. Xavier's health began to decline slowly. Nothing dramatic, just the natural wearing down that comes with age. His joints ached more. He tired more easily, but his mind remained sharp, and his love for Penelope never wavered. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing year. Penelope had her own aches and pains, but she remained the backbone of the family, the one everyone turned to for advice and comfort. Her kitchen was still the heart of the home, always welcoming family members who stopped by for coffee and conversation. One winter evening in early 1925, as snow fell gently outside, Xavier and Penelope sat by the fireplace in the house he had built for her 42 years earlier. Xavier was 70 now, Penelope 67. They had lived a lifetime together, and both knew they were in the twilight of their years. "Tell me about the storm again," Xavier said suddenly. Penelope smiled, understanding why he wanted to hear it. The story had become sacred to them, a reminder of where they had come from and what they had built. "It was November," Penelope began, settling back in her chair. "The wind was so cold it felt like knives cutting through my clothes. I had been walking for hours after the wagon overturned. I was in labor but did not want to admit it, even to myself. I just kept putting one foot in front of the other, thinking about Thomas inside me, thinking I had to keep going for him." Xavier listened, though he knew every word of the story by heart. He never tired of hearing it. "Then I saw your light through the trees," Penelope continued. "Just a tiny glow, but it might as well have been the brightest star in the sky. I remember thinking, please let someone be home, please let them help me. I knocked on the door, and when you opened it, I fell right into your arms. You were so cold," Xavier said, "and so brave. You should have been dead, walking through that storm in your condition, but you were determined to survive." "I had no choice," Penelope said. "I had Thomas to think about, and as it turned out, I had you to find. The storm brought me exactly where I needed to be." "And gave me exactly what I needed," Xavier added, "even though I did not know I needed it." They sat quietly, watching the fire, thinking about all the years and all the love that had flowed from that one stormy night. Outside, the snow continued to fall, gentler than that long-ago blizzard but reminiscent of it nonetheless. "I am tired," Xavier admitted quietly. "More tired than I have ever been." Penelope reached for his hand, her own showing the spots and wrinkles of age. "I know. I am tired too. But I am not ready to go yet," Xavier continued. "There is still so much I want to do with you, so many more sunsets to watch, so many more days to spend together." "We have had 43 years," Penelope reminded him gently. 43 beautiful years that we were never supposed to have." "We have been blessed beyond measure, Xavier." "I know," he said, "and I am grateful for every single day. I just wish we could have more." "We will have however many we are given," Penelope said, "and we will make the most of each one just like we always have." Xavier pulled her close, and they sat together in front of the fire. Two people who had found each other against impossible odds and built a love that would outlast them both. Around them, the house stood solid and warm, a testament to the life they had created. In the distance, they could see lights from Thomas's house and James's house, their children and grandchildren close enough to reach but far enough to have their own lives. "This is what legacy looks like," Xavier said softly. "Not just children and grandchildren, but a family that knows how to love. We did that, Penelope. Together, we built something that will last." "We did," Penelope agreed, her head resting on his shoulder. "And it started with you opening a door in a storm and choosing to help a stranger." "Best choice I ever made," Xavier said, as he had said so many times over the years. "Best storm I ever survived," Penelope replied, her voice warm with affection and memory. They sat together as the fire burned low and the snow fell outside, two hearts still beating as one after 43 years of marriage, grateful for every moment of the life the storm had given them. Xavier lived another 3 years. passing peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1928 at the age of 73, with Penelope holding his hand. His funeral brought the entire community together, a testament to the life he had lived and the respect he had earned. Every member of his large family was there to say goodbye to the man who had loved them all so completely. Penelope mourned deeply, but found comfort in her children and grandchildren, in the memories of 46 years of marriage, and in the knowledge that Xavier's love surrounded her still. She lived another 5 years, passing away in the autumn of 1933 at the age of 75, reunited at last with the man who had saved her life and given her a future. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together, under the vast Montana sky they had loved. The headstone Thomas commissioned bore simple words: Xavier Vaughn, beloved husband, father, and grandfather, and Penelope Vaughn, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother, together forever. But their true legacy was not in stone. It lived in the 5 children they had raised, in the dozens of grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried their blood and their values forward. It lived in the ranch that still bore the Vaughn name, passed down through generations. It lived in the stories told around dinner tables, of a storm and a stranger and a love that changed everything. Thomas, now in his late 50s and the patriarch of the family, gathered everyone together after his mother's funeral. Standing in the house his father had built, surrounded by the family his parents had created, he told the story one more time. 51 years ago, Thomas began, a storm brought my mother to my father's door. She was pregnant with me, alone and desperate. My father could have turned her away. He could have been too scared or too selfish to help. But he opened that door, and in doing so, he opened his heart. He delivered me that night, and in a way, he delivered his own future. Thomas's voice wavered with emotion as he continued. They taught us all what love looks like. Not the easy kind of love, but the kind that chooses to show up every day, that works through problems, that builds something lasting. They showed us that family is not just about blood, but about commitment and care and showing up for each other. He looked around at all the faces, 3 generations of Vaughns present in that house. We are their legacy. The love they shared, the values they taught, the family they built, that is all here in this room. And it is our responsibility to carry it forward, to pass it on to our children and grandchildren, so that 100 years from now, people will still tell the story of the storm that brought Penelope to Xavier's door and the beautiful life they built together. There was not a dry eye in the room when Thomas finished. The family stood together, united in grief, but also in gratitude for the 2 people who had started it all, who had shown them what love and family and commitment really meant. As the years passed and the story was told and retold, it took on the quality of legend. The winter storm of 1882 that brought a pregnant stranger to a lonely cowboy's door became a foundational myth for the Vaughn family, a reminder of where they came from and who they were meant to be. Children grew up hearing about great-grandpa Xavier opening the door and great-grandma Penelope collapsing into his arms, about the baby delivered during a blizzard who became Thomas Vaughn, successful rancher and beloved father. The ranch itself prospered through the decades, adapting to changing times but always remaining in Vaughn hands. Each generation added their own chapter to the family story, but it all traced back to that November night in 1882, when a storm brought 2 people together who were meant to be. And if you were to visit the ranch today, you would still see the original house Xavier built for Penelope, preserved and maintained by the family as a reminder of their history. You would see the hill where Xavier and Penelope rest side by side, overlooking the land they loved. And if you listened carefully to the wind blowing across the Montana plains, You might almost hear the echo of that long-ago storm, the one that changed everything, the one that brought a pregnant stranger to a cowboy's door and delivered not just a baby, but a future filled with love, family, and a legacy that endures through generations. The storm that night had been fierce and unforgiving, the kind that destroyed as much as it created. But from that destruction came something beautiful and lasting, proof that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the best, that helping a stranger can change your destiny, and that love, once found, can build something that withstands any storm life throws at it. Xavier Vaughn opened his door that night expecting nothing more than to help someone in need. He could not have known he was opening the door to his future, to a love that would define the rest of his life, to a family that would carry his name and values forward long after he was gone. He just knew someone needed help, and he chose to give it. That simple choice, that moment of compassion and courage, rippled forward through time, touching countless lives and creating a legacy of love that would never be forgotten. And that, in the end, is the true story of the winter storm that brought a pregnant stranger to a cowboy's door, of the baby he delivered, and of the beautiful future they all built together in the wilds of Montana, where the sky is vast and the land is unforgiving, but love, once found, lasts forever.